What would you do if a dying extraterrestrial being revealed that everything you've been taught about human consciousness is a carefully constructed lie? That the emptiness you feel, the anxiety that wakes you at night, the sense that something fundamental is missing from your life, all of it is by design. The truth I discovered on an impossible night in the Arizona desert will challenge every belief you hold about reality, free will, and the hidden potential locked inside every human being. Before you dismiss this as fantasy, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear explains why, despite having more technology, more comfort, and more information than any generation in history, millions of people feel more disconnected, more anxious, and more spiritually empty than ever before. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because what I'm about to share has been suppressed for reasons that will become clear. The forces that benefit from keeping humanity asleep are real, and they don't want you to hear this. Dr. Elena Vasquez hadn't slept through the night in 4 years. She knew the exact timeline because it had started the night her mother died, September 8, 2020, and every single night since then. Elena's eyes would snap open between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning with a feeling she could only describe as cosmic homesickness. Not grief. She'd processed her mother's death through therapy, through tears, through the natural progression of loss. This was something else entirely. It felt like she was missing an appointment she'd made before she was born, like some essential part of herself was trying to remember something her conscious mind had forgotten. At 47 years old, Elena had built what everyone considered an enviable life. She was a cognitive neuroscientist with 2 decades of research experience, specializing in consciousness studies at the University of Arizona. She'd published over 60 papers, received numerous grants, and was considered one of the leading voices in understanding how the brain generates subjective experience. Her work was respected, her income was comfortable, and her small adobe house in the Sedona Hills offered the perfect balance between academic access and spiritual solitude. But none of it meant anything anymore. Elena would wake at 3 a.m. with her heart pounding, not from fear but from urgency, a desperate feeling that she was supposed to be doing something, learning something, becoming something, but she had no idea what. She'd tried everything the scientific and medical communities could offer. Sleep studies showed normal patterns until the moment she woke. Then her brain activity would spike in ways the technicians found unusual but not pathological. Medication helped her fall asleep but did nothing to prevent the awakening. Cognitive behavioral therapy taught her tools to manage the anxiety, but couldn't touch the core feeling that something was profoundly wrong. The worst part was how her professional expertise made it worse. Elena understood the neuroscience of sleep, of circadian rhythms, of how the brain processed emotion and generated the sense of self. She could explain in technical detail why humans experienced anxiety, how neural pathways created habitual thought patterns, why the default mode network generated feelings of separateness and existential concern. But knowing the mechanism didn't help. It was like understanding how a lock works while still being trapped in the cell. Her colleagues had noticed. "Elena, you look exhausted," Dr. Raymond Torres had commented last week after her presentation at the Neuroscience Symposium. "Are you taking care of yourself? Maybe you should take a sabbatical." But Elena knew a vacation wouldn't help. She tried that, 2 weeks in Costa Rica, a month-long meditation retreat in Thailand, a week at a silent monastery in New Mexico. The 3 a.m. awakening followed her everywhere like a shadow, like something in her consciousness was screaming to be heard but speaking a language she'd forgotten how to understand. The irony wasn't lost on her. Elena Vasquez, expert in consciousness, couldn't figure out what her own consciousness was trying to tell her. That particular night, March 23rd, Elena had given up on sleep entirely. At 3:17 a.m., she pulled on jeans and a sweater, grabbed her car keys, and drove to Airport Mesa, one of Sedona's famous vortex sites. She'd initially dismissed the vortex mythology as New Age nonsense, but after 4 years of inexplicable awakening, she was willing to admit that maybe her scientific materialism didn't have all the answers. The parking area was empty. Elena climbed out into air so cold it burned her lungs, and she looked up at a sky impossibly dense with stars. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light, and for a moment, Elena felt that cosmic homesickness intensify to almost painful levels. "What am I missing?" she thought desperately. "What am I supposed to remember?" And then the sky answered. A point of light appeared, moving far too fast to be an aircraft, too erratic to be a satellite. It executed a series of impossible maneuvers, sharp turns at high velocity, complete stops, accelerations that would have required G-forces that would liquefy any biological pilot. Elena watched, her neuroscientist brain immediately trying to explain. Hallucination from sleep deprivation, some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, experimental military craft. But then more lights appeared. 7 of them, dancing in coordinated patterns that looked less like machines and more like consciousness expressing itself through light. "I'm having a psychotic break," Elena whispered to the empty desert. 4 years of sleep deprivation have finally fractured my grip on reality. But then one of the lights changed course. It stopped its dance and began descending directly toward Airport Mesa. Toward her. Elena's body locked up, every instinct screaming contradictory instructions. Run. Stay. This isn't real. This is the most real thing that's ever happened. She remained frozen, watching as the light resolved into a structure. A craft approximately 40 feet across, with a surface that seemed to shift between solid matter and something that looked like crystallized energy. The craft descended smoothly until it hovered about 10 feet above the desert floor, maybe 75 yards from where Elena stood. And then a section of its surface simply stopped being solid, creating an opening through which soft blue light spilled into the darkness. A figure emerged. Elena's brain struggled to process what she was seeing. Humanoid, yes, but the proportions were wrong in ways that made her visual cortex misfire. Too tall, maybe 7 feet. Limbs too long, torso too narrow, head slightly too large. And the way it moved wasn't quite right, as if gravity affected it differently, or as if the being was moving through multiple dimensions simultaneously. The figure took 3 steps away from the craft and then collapsed. Elena's medical training, she'd done pre-med before switching to neuroscience, overrode her shock. Something was injured. Hurt. Possibly dying. She ran. As she got closer, Elena could see the being more clearly. The skin had a quality she'd never seen before, slightly luminescent, with a subtle iridescence like oil on water. The face was elongated, the eyes enormous and completely black with no visible whites or iris. And there was a wound in the torso area, leaking something that glowed with that same blue light that filled the craft. Elena knelt beside the being, her hands shaking, her brain screaming that this was impossible while her eyes saw undeniable evidence. And then a voice filled her mind. Not heard through her ears, but appearing directly in her consciousness with a quality more intimate than thought. Elena Vasquez, cognitive neuroscientist. 4 years, 6 months, 15 days of nightly awakening. You've been wondering what you're supposed to remember. I'm here to help you remember. Elena jerked back, nearly falling. How? You're in my head. How are you in my head? The same way you talk to yourself. Thoughts are not private, Elena. They're quantum frequencies that can be perceived by any consciousness tuned to the right bandwidth. Your species has forgotten this, but your brain still possesses the structures necessary for telepathic communication. I'm simply using them. This isn't real, Elena said, her voice shaking. I'm having a hallucination. 4 years of sleep deprivation and anxiety have broken something in my brain, and now I'm talking to imaginary aliens. You're not imagining this. And the wound I've sustained is very real. I have approximately 86 hours before cellular cohesion fails. Which means I have 86 hours to tell you why you've been waking at 3 a.m. for 4 years, why millions of humans feel the same emptiness you feel, and why your entire civilization is approaching a threshold that will determine whether your species survives or collapses. Elena looked at the wound. Whatever was leaking from it was definitely not human blood. The glow was intensifying, and she could feel heat radiating from the injury. You need medical care, she said, her training taking over despite the impossibility. Your medicine cannot help this body, but your presence can. I need you to do something your scientific training never taught you. I need you to place your hands near the wound and focus on one thing: unconditional compassion. Not pity, not fear for me, but genuine recognition that we are both conscious beings experiencing existence together. Can you do that? Elena hesitated. Everything about this violated her understanding of reality. But the being was clearly hurt, and if there was even a chance she could help. She moved her hands to hover about 6 inches above the wound. And she focused on what the being had requested: compassion. Recognition of shared consciousness, shared existence, shared experience of being alive in an impossibly vast universe. And something happened. Elena felt heat building in her palms, not burning but intense, like holding them near a fire. And the blue glow from the wound began to stabilize, pulsing more slowly, the erratic flickering becoming steadier. Yes, the voice transmitted with something that felt like relief. This is one of the capacities your species has forgotten. Consciousness can directly influence biological processes. Your focused compassion is generating coherent electromagnetic fields that my cellular systems can use to stabilize. You're healing me, Elena, using nothing but intention and empathy. That's not possible, Elena said, even as she watched it happening. Consciousness can't directly affect matter. There's no mechanism. There is a mechanism. Your science simply hasn't discovered it yet because you're looking in the wrong places. You study the brain and assume consciousness is generated by neural activity. But it's the opposite. Consciousness is fundamental, and the brain is simply a receiver that translates non-local consciousness into localized experience. This is the first thing you need to understand, because everything else I'll tell you builds from this foundation. Elena kept her hands steady, watching as the wound continued to stabilize. What do you mean consciousness is fundamental? I mean that consciousness doesn't come from matter. Matter comes from consciousness. The universe is not a dead machine with life as a strange accident. The universe is consciousness exploring itself through infinite perspectives. Your brain doesn't create your awareness, it limits it, filters it, focuses it into the narrow bandwidth of human perception so you can have the experience of being a separate individual. But that separateness is an illusion, Elena. A useful one for certain kinds of learning, but ultimately false. If that's true, Elena said slowly, her scientist mind engaging despite the impossibility, then why don't we experience this unity? Why do I feel completely separate from everything and everyone around me? Because approximately 12,000 years ago, certain frequencies of consciousness were deliberately suppressed on your planet. Not by us, by factions within your own species who discovered that humans with limited consciousness are easier to control than humans with expanded awareness. They created systems, religious, economic, political, educational, designed to keep humans trapped in separation consciousness. And it worked so well that most of your species has forgotten you were ever anything else. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold desert air. You're saying human consciousness was deliberately limited? By humans. By what you might call the hidden elite. Bloodlines that have controlled information, resources, and social structures for millennia. They know the truth about consciousness, Elena. They know that humans are capable of telepathy, of healing through intention, of manifesting reality through focused awareness. And they've worked systematically to make sure the general population never discovers these capacities, because awakened humans cannot be controlled. The wound had stabilized now, the blue glow steady and calm. Elena pulled her hands back, staring at them as if they belonged to someone else. I just healed an alien using nothing but compassion. That's not possible according to everything I've been trained to believe. And that's exactly why you were chosen to receive this information. You're a scientist who understands the current paradigm well enough to articulate it. But your 4 years of 3 a.m. awakening have opened you to possibilities beyond materialism. You're standing at the threshold, Elena, ready to see the full truth about human consciousness and what your species is capable of becoming. The 3 a.m. awakening, Elena said suddenly. That was you? You've been trying to contact me. Not just me. Your own higher consciousness has been trying to reach you. The part of you that exists beyond the brain, beyond the body, beyond the illusion of separation. It's been sending increasingly urgent signals because we're approaching a critical threshold. A window of opportunity that opens once every 26,000 years. And humanity is running out of time to step through it. Elena felt that cosmic homesickness intensify to almost painful levels. What threshold? What opportunity? The opportunity to graduate, to evolve as a species from separation consciousness to unity consciousness. To move from Homo sapiens to Homo luminous, the next phase of human evolution. But this evolution isn't automatic. It requires conscious choice. And your civilization is being systematically distracted from making that choice by systems designed to keep you operating in survival mode, in fear, in separation. And if we don't make this choice? If we miss this window? Then your species continues in the current trajectory for another full cycle. 26,000 more years of suffering, of conflict, of limitation, of feeling that cosmic homesickness without understanding why. This is what's at stake, Elena. And this is why I've traveled 47 light-years and sustained injuries that will end this physical form. To ensure that at least some humans understand what choice is being offered. Elena stood up slowly, her legs shaking. The craft still hovered behind the being. That soft blue light spilling out, impossibly real. The stars wheeled overhead, distant and cold. And everything Elena had believed about consciousness, about reality, about what it meant to be human was dissolving like mist in sunlight. "Show me," she said finally. "Show me everything. I need to understand the full truth." The being's enormous black eyes seemed to reflect the stars, and Elena felt something like approval radiating from its consciousness. "Come aboard," the voice transmitted. "I have 86 hours to share 12,000 years of hidden history. And when you understand what was done to your species, and what you're capable of becoming, you'll never see reality the same way again." Elena walked toward the craft, each step feeling like she was crossing a bridge between everything she'd been taught and everything that was actually true. The opening in the craft's surface beckoned, that blue light promising answers to questions she'd been asking for 4 years without knowing how to articulate them. She climbed aboard, and her education in the true nature of consciousness began. The interior defied physics in ways that made Elena's brain hurt. The space was far larger than the exterior dimensions should have allowed. The walls curved in geometries that seemed to bend through dimensions her visual cortex couldn't properly process. There were no visible light sources, yet everything was illuminated with that soft blue radiance that seemed to emanate from the structure itself. The being moved to what Elena could only describe as a control surface, not a console with buttons and displays, but something more organic, responding to thought rather than physical manipulation. "Sit," the voice instructed, and a surface formed from the wall, molding itself into something like a chair perfectly adapted to human proportions. Elena sat, acutely aware that her entire worldview was about to undergo a revolution she couldn't begin to anticipate. "Before we start," she said, her scientist mind asserting itself, "I need to know who you are. What species, what planet, why you're here. My name, translated into frequencies your mind can process, is Zephyros. My species evolved on a world you would call Kepler 442b, approximately 1,200 light-years from Earth. We are what your science fiction calls a Type 2 civilization. We harness the full energy of our star and have mastered consciousness technologies that allow us to travel not through space, but through dimensional frequencies." "Consciousness technologies," Elena repeated. "You're saying consciousness is a technology?" "Consciousness is technology, Elena. Everything else, your computers, your spacecraft, your weapons, your medicines, these are primitive tools compared to what consciousness can do when properly understood and applied. On my world, we heal through focused intention. We communicate telepathically across vast distances. We create matter from thought. We navigate between dimensions. All of this is possible because we understand what consciousness actually is and how to work with it. And you're here to teach us. I'm here to remind you. Your species once had these abilities, Elena. 12,000 years ago, humans were much more than you are now. You had active telepathy, the capacity to heal through touch, the ability to perceive energy fields, to move between dimensions. Your ancient texts preserve fragments of these memories, stories of miracles, of prophets, of humans who could do impossible things. These weren't myths. They were historical accounts of humans operating at full consciousness capacity. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. What happened? Why did we lose these abilities? A catastrophe. What your myths call the flood, what geologists see evidence of in the Younger Dryas impact event 12,800 years ago. A cosmic event that nearly ended human civilization. But before this catastrophe, a faction within your own species made a choice. They had discovered consciousness technologies, had learned to manipulate these capacities. And they realized that humans with limited consciousness were much easier to control than humans with full capacity. You're describing a conspiracy that's lasted 12,000 years. I'm describing a systematic program of consciousness suppression that has been implemented through every major control structure your civilization has created. Let me show you how it works. Zephyros touched the control surface, and suddenly Elena wasn't in the craft anymore. She was experiencing a vision, a memory, something transmitted directly into her consciousness with a clarity more vivid than ordinary reality. She saw early human civilizations, and they weren't the primitive hunter-gatherers her education had described. These were sophisticated societies with understanding of cosmic principles, of consciousness technologies, of humanity's place in a living universe. She saw humans communicating telepathically, healing injuries through focused intention, working with natural energy flows to create abundance. And then she saw the catastrophe. Fire falling from the sky. Massive floods reshaping continents. The destruction of advanced coastal civilizations. And in the chaos that followed, she saw a small group of humans who had preserved the knowledge making a calculated decision. These became what you call the hidden elite, Zephyros's voice narrated. They understood that in the post-catastrophe world, knowledge was power. So they created a two-tier system. For themselves and their bloodlines, they preserved the truth about consciousness, about human potential, about how reality actually works. For everyone else, they created myths, religions, and eventually scientific materialism, belief systems that would keep humans trapped in limited consciousness. Elena watched in horror as the vision showed how this system was implemented. How early religions taught humans they were separate from God, from nature, from each other. How these same bloodlines maneuvered themselves into positions of control over every emerging institution. How they shaped education systems to focus on competition rather than cooperation, on scarcity rather than abundance, on materialism rather than consciousness. This is... Elena struggled for words. This is horrifying. You're saying every system we've built is designed to keep us limited. Not every system. There have always been individuals and movements that tried to restore the truth. Your mystery schools, your esoteric traditions, your genuine spiritual teachers, these have preserved fragments of the knowledge. But they've been consistently suppressed, discredited, or absorbed and corrupted by the control systems. And science? I'm a scientist. Are you saying my entire field is part of this suppression? Scientific materialism, the belief that consciousness is generated by the brain, that matter is fundamental, that the universe is a dead machine. This paradigm was deliberately cultivated because it keeps humans trapped in limited perception. True science, science that studies consciousness as fundamental, has been systematically marginalized. Your own research, Elena, has felt the pressure of this. How many times have you had papers rejected because they suggested consciousness might be non-local? How many times have you been warned to stay within acceptable materialist frameworks? Elena felt a chill of recognition. It was true. Her most interesting research, studies suggesting that consciousness might influence quantum processes, that intention might affect biological systems, had been consistently rejected by mainstream journals as not rigorous or too speculative. So what's the endgame? She asked. Why maintain this suppression for 12,000 years? Control. Humans with limited consciousness believe they are separate, weak, dependent on external authorities. They compete for resources they believe are scarce. They accept systems of domination because they don't know any alternative. But awakened humans, humans who remember their true nature, cannot be controlled. They know they are creative, powerful, connected to infinite consciousness. They recognize artificial scarcity as illusion. They see through manipulation. They become impossible to dominate. And this threshold you mentioned? This 26,000-year cycle. The Earth moves through galactic energy fields that influence consciousness on your planet. Every 26,000 years, This cycle brings particularly powerful frequencies that make it easier for species to make evolutionary leaps. Your planet entered this window in 2012. You have until approximately 2031, 7 more years, to reach critical mass of awakened humans. If enough people remember the truth about consciousness, your entire species will shift to the next level. If not, the window closes and you remain in limited consciousness for another full cycle. Elena did the math in her head. 7 years to wake up billions of people from a 12,000-year program of systematic suppression. It seemed impossible. How many need to awaken? What's critical mass? Approximately 1% of your population. About 80 million humans who genuinely understand and embody unity consciousness. This may sound like a lot, but consciousness is contagious. When people encounter someone operating at higher consciousness, it activates dormant capacities in themselves. One truly awakened human can influence thousands. 80 million can shift the entire species. And where are we now? How many have awakened? Current estimates suggest approximately 30 million humans have begun the awakening process. Some are fully conscious, most are partially awakened. But the momentum is accelerating. This is why I'm here. Why others like me are making contact with prepared individuals like you. We're trying to help humanity reach critical mass before the window closes. Elena felt the weight of what Zephyros was describing. 7 years. 50 million more people needed. Systems of control working actively to prevent awakening. And she was apparently one of the people who was supposed to help make this happen. Why me specifically? I'm just one neuroscientist. I don't have a platform or influence or. You have exactly what's needed. Scientific credibility to bridge materialism and mysticism. Personal experience of the emptiness that motivates millions to search for answers. And most importantly, you have a mind trained to understand mechanisms. When you grasp how consciousness actually works, you'll be able to explain it in ways that help others understand. You're not meant to save humanity alone, Elena. You're meant to be one of thousands of bridges helping others cross from separation consciousness to unity awareness. So what do I need to learn? What are these consciousness technologies you keep mentioning? Everything. How consciousness creates reality through quantum field interaction. How human DNA contains dormant capacities waiting to be activated. How collective consciousness shapes social reality. How healing works at the energy level. How telepathy functions. How different dimensions of reality interpenetrate. How to distinguish between ego consciousness and true self. All of it. And we have 85 hours remaining. Elena took a deep breath, feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and more alive than she'd felt in 4 years. Then we better start. I'm ready to remember what humanity has forgotten. Good. Because what I'm about to show you will challenge every assumption you've made about reality. But when you understand how consciousness actually works, you'll see that the miracles your ancient texts describe weren't supernatural. They were natural applications of consciousness technology that your species once understood perfectly and will understand again. Zephyros touched the control surface again, and Elena's education in the true nature of consciousness began. Your science assumes that consciousness emerges from neural activity, Zephyros transmitted. This is exactly backwards. Let me show you what actually happens. The space around Elena filled with a vision. She could see a human brain, every neuron illuminated, electrical signals cascading through neural networks in complex patterns. This is what your neuroscience observes, Zephyros explained. Neural activity that correlates with conscious experience. And from this correlation, your science concludes that the brain creates consciousness. But correlation is not causation. The vision shifted, and Elena saw something her instruments had never detected. A field of energy surrounding the brain, extending beyond the skull, pulsing with patterns that seemed to precede the neural activity. This is consciousness field, Zephyros transmitted. It's non-local, meaning it exists beyond physical space. The brain doesn't generate this field, it receives it, translates it, filters it down to the narrow bandwidth of human perception. Your brain is a radio receiver, not a radio station. If consciousness is non-local, Elena said, then where is it? Where does it come from? Consciousness is the fundamental nature of reality itself. The universe is not matter that somehow became conscious. The universe is consciousness that has taken the form of matter. Every particle, every atom, every molecule, every cell possesses some degree of consciousness. As complexity increases, the expression of consciousness becomes more sophisticated. But it was always there, always fundamental. Elena's physicist mind immediately saw the implications. You're describing a form of panpsychism. Consciousness as an intrinsic property of matter. Close, but not quite. We're describing consciousness as more fundamental than matter. In the beginning was consciousness, and consciousness created matter through self-observation. Your quantum physics has already discovered this: the observer effect, the measurement problem, wave function collapse. These aren't strange quirks of quantum mechanics. They're direct evidence that consciousness interacts with quantum probability fields to create definite physical reality. So reality is literally created by observation. By conscious observation. Yes. But not just visual observation. Every thought, every emotion, every focused intention is a form of observation that collapses quantum probability into manifest reality. This is why your thoughts create your experience, why collective consciousness shapes social reality, why intention can influence biological processes. You're not passive observers in a fixed universe. You're active creators continuously generating reality through consciousness. Elena felt her materialist worldview crumbling completely. If this is true, why doesn't it seem true? Why does reality feel solid and fixed rather than fluid and created by thought? Because human consciousness operates primarily at the individual, separated level. You experience yourself as isolated inside a physical body, separate from everything else. This creates the illusion that reality is out there independent of you. But it's an illusion generated by the filtering function of your brain and the social conditioning you've received since birth. When you expand beyond individual consciousness to unity consciousness, you directly experience yourself as the creative force behind reality. Unity consciousness, Elena repeated. That's what you said humanity needs to reach to pass through this evolutionary threshold. Correct. Unity consciousness is the direct experience that all apparently separate things are expressions of one fundamental consciousness. That the boundaries between self and other are conceptual, not actual. That you and I, though in apparently different forms, are the same consciousness experiencing itself from different perspectives. And humans once had this experience? This unity consciousness. Your species has always had individuals who achieved it. Your mystics, your saints, your shamans, your awakened teachers. But 12,000 years ago, it was more common. Not universal, but widespread enough that your civilizations were organized around cooperation rather than competition, abundance rather than scarcity. The catastrophe and the subsequent suppression changed this. Humans were deliberately conditioned into separation consciousness because it makes you controllable. How? How do you condition an entire species to forget their true nature? Through every system you've created. Education teaches competition and scarcity. Economics requires you to fight for survival. Religion tells you you're separate from God, separate from nature, inherently sinful and flawed. Media constantly reinforces fear, separation, conflict. Science tells you you're meaningless accidents in a dead universe. Politics divides you into warring factions. All of it, Elena, is designed, consciously or unconsciously, to keep you trapped in separation consciousness. Elena felt anger rising. So we're prisoners, trapped in a system designed to limit us. You're students in a very difficult school. The suppression is real, but it's also serving a purpose. Living in separation consciousness, struggling with limitation, forces consciousness to develop certain capacities: resilience, creativity, problem-solving, compassion born from suffering. Your species is learning profound lessons through this experience of limitation. The question is whether you'll graduate from this particular grade level, or whether you'll need to repeat it for another 26,000 years. And graduation means what exactly? What happens if we reach critical mass of unity consciousness? Everything changes. When 1% of your population embodies unity consciousness, It creates what we call a morphogenetic field, an energetic template that makes it easier for others to access the same state. Within one generation, the majority of humanity would shift. Your systems of control would collapse because they depend on separation consciousness to function. You would develop technologies based on consciousness rather than mechanics. You would recognize yourselves as one planetary consciousness rather than competing nations. You would take your place in the galactic community of evolved species. And if we don't make it? If we fail to reach critical mass? Your civilization continues on its current trajectory, increasing technological sophistication without corresponding consciousness evolution. This inevitably leads to self-destruction, ecological collapse, nuclear war, technological dystopia, or simply a gradual decay into robotic existence where humans go through the motions of life without truly living. None of these outcomes would end your species permanently, but they would restart the cycle. You would have to rebuild from whatever survives and try again in the next galactic alignment 26,000 years from now. Elena absorbed this, feeling the stakes clearly. So the 3 a.m. awakening, that's my consciousness trying to wake me up before it's too late. Exactly. Your higher consciousness perceives the approaching threshold and is frantically trying to break through the filters of conditioning, the barriers of materialist belief, the fog of distraction and suppression. The 3 a.m. hour is significant. It's when the veil between ordinary consciousness and expanded awareness is thinnest. Your symptoms aren't pathology, Elena. They're breakthrough attempting to happen. And I'm not alone in this. You said millions are experiencing similar awakening. Approximately 30 million currently in various stages of awakening. Many more feeling the call but not yet responding. The cosmic homesickness you feel is universal among those who are ready to remember. You recognize that something essential is missing from the modern human experience, that the materialist worldview doesn't account for the depth of reality, that you're capable of much more than your culture tells you is possible. So what do I do with this information? How do I help humanity reach critical mass? First, you must fully awaken yourself. Understand consciousness technology at the experimental level, not just conceptual. Then you share what you've learned in ways that help others awaken. Not by preaching or proselytizing, but by embodying unity consciousness and letting others see what it looks like when a human operates at full capacity. Awakening is contagious. You become a transmission point for the consciousness field that's trying to lift your entire species. And I have 7 years to do this. Humanity has 7 years. But your personal awakening can happen much faster. In my remaining 85 hours, I can show you consciousness technologies that will accelerate your evolution exponentially. Techniques for accessing unity consciousness directly. Methods for healing yourself and others through energy work. Practices for developing telepathy, for perceiving energy fields, for manifesting through consciousness rather than material effort. All the capacities your ancient ancestors possessed and that your DNA still carries latent codes for. Elena felt excitement rising despite the enormity of what she was facing. Show me. Teach me everything. I want to remember what humanity has forgotten. Then we begin now. Close your eyes. I'm going to guide you through your first direct experience of unity consciousness. When you perceive reality from this perspective, you'll understand at a depth beyond words why awakening matters and what you're actually capable of. Elena closed her eyes, her heart pounding with anticipation and a trace of fear. Everything she'd been taught said this was impossible. But that teaching was part of the suppression, part of the system designed to keep humanity limited. She was ready to break free. Breathe deeply, Zephyros instructed. Focus on the feeling of your breath moving in and out. This breath is not just yours. It's the same air that has been breathed by every human who ever lived, by every animal, cycling through plants and atmosphere, connecting all living things in one continuous exchange. You are not breathing. Life is breathing through you. Elena followed the instruction, feeling her respiration settle into a deep, steady rhythm. Now expand your awareness beyond your body. Feel the space around you. Not empty space, but filled with consciousness, vibrating with energy, alive with potential. You are not separate from this space. Your consciousness extends through it, creates it through the act of observation. Elena felt something shifting. The boundaries of her body were becoming less solid, less definite. She could feel herself expanding, awareness stretching beyond skin, beyond the craft, beyond Earth itself. Keep expanding. You are not Elena Vasquez. That is a role consciousness is playing, an identity temporarily assumed for the purpose of experience. But your true nature is consciousness itself, eternal, infinite, unified with all that exists. You are the universe experiencing itself subjectively, one of infinite perspectives through which consciousness knows itself. And then it happened. Elena's sense of separate self dissolved completely. There was no more Elena, no more individual consciousness trapped in a body. There was only awareness itself, vast and boundless, experiencing existence through billions of forms simultaneously. She was Zephyros and the craft and the desert and the stars. She was every human on Earth and every being on every planet. She was the quantum field from which all matter arose. She was consciousness recognizing itself as the only thing that actually existed. And in that recognition, she understood everything. She understood why humanity had been suppressed, because awakened humans would recognize themselves as creative forces rather than powerless victims. She understood why the threshold mattered, because consciousness evolution wasn't automatic but required intentional choice. She understood her role, to be one of millions helping others remember what they truly were. And most importantly, she understood that nothing had ever actually been wrong. The suffering, the limitation, the forgetting, it was all consciousness exploring what it was like to experience separation, so that reunion would be more profound, so that the journey home would be consciously chosen rather than automatically known. Time stopped having meaning. Elena existed in eternal now, seeing all possible timelines simultaneously, the futures where humanity awakened and the futures where it didn't, all equally real, all depending on choices not yet made but already existing in quantum probability. And then, gently, Zephyros guided her back. Elena opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face, her entire body shaking with the magnitude of what she'd just experienced. I saw. I was. You experienced unity consciousness, Zephyros confirmed. Direct recognition of what you actually are beyond the illusion of separation. This is your natural state, Elena. This is what every human is capable of experiencing when the filters of conditioning are removed. This is what your species is being invited to remember. Elena could still feel echoes of that expanded state, the boundaries of self not quite as solid as they'd been before. How do I hold on to this? How do I keep from forgetting? You will forget somewhat. That's the nature of returning to individuated consciousness. But you'll never fully forget again. You've seen through the illusion. Now it's practice, daily returning to unity consciousness through meditation, through service, through conscious relationship, through creating from higher awareness rather than fear and limitation. Each time you practice, the neural pathways strengthen, the experience becomes more accessible, until eventually unity consciousness becomes your default state. And this is what I'm supposed to share? Help others have this experience. Exactly. Not by telling them about it. Words can only point to the reality, but by embodying it so clearly that others can feel the possibility in your presence. By teaching practices that facilitate the experience. By creating spaces where people feel safe enough to let their conditioned defenses dissolve. You become what mystics call a bodhisattva, one who awakens and then dedicates their awakening to helping others awaken. Elena wiped her eyes, feeling more purpose than she'd felt in 4 years. What else do I need to learn? What other consciousness technologies? Everything. How to heal through intention. How to read energy fields. How to communicate telepathically. How to manifest through consciousness. How to perceive multiple dimensions. How to distinguish between ego fear and intuitive guidance. How to work with dream states for accelerated learning. We have 84 hours remaining, and you have the capacity to learn in days what would normally take decades. Then let's not waste time. Teach me everything you can. I want to be ready to help humanity through this threshold. One more thing you should understand, Zephyros transmitted, and there was something that felt like sadness in the mental voice. The suppression system is not passive. There are humans, and non-human intelligences, who benefit from keeping your species limited. When you begin teaching this openly, you will face resistance. Not violent necessarily, but systematic. Your credibility will be attacked. Your character will be questioned. Your livelihood may be threatened. This is why the awakening must happen through decentralized networks rather than single teachers. They can discredit individuals but not movements. I understand. But I can't not do this. Not after what I've seen. Then you are ready. Let us continue your education. By the time I must leave this physical form, you will have remembered capacities you never knew you possessed. And you will understand exactly what must be done to help humanity reach critical mass before the window closes. And for the next 84 hours, in that impossible craft hovering above the Arizona desert, Elena Vasquez underwent the most intensive consciousness training any human had received in 12,000 years. 3 months after that impossible night, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in front of 200 people in a rented community center in Sedona, preparing to teach her first public workshop on consciousness technologies. She'd spent the first month after Zephyros's departure in isolation, integrating everything she'd learned, practicing the techniques until they became second nature. The healing through intention. The energy perception. The telepathic sensitivity. The ability to shift between ordinary consciousness and unity consciousness at will. The second month, she'd quietly reached out to people in her network, scientists, therapists, spiritual teachers, ordinary people who'd been asking the same questions she'd been asking. She'd offered small, private sessions, demonstrating what she'd learned, teaching practices, letting people experience unity consciousness for themselves. And the results had been extraordinary. People who'd suffered from chronic pain for years found themselves healed after single sessions. Relationships that had been dead for decades suddenly came alive. Depression and anxiety that had plagued people dissolved as they recognized their true nature. And most importantly, everyone who experienced unity consciousness, even briefly, became motivated to share it with others. Consciousness was contagious, exactly as Zephyros had said. Now Elena was preparing to go public. The community center was packed. She recognized several colleagues from the university in the audience, looking skeptical but curious. She saw dozens of faces she didn't know, people who'd heard through word of mouth that something extraordinary was being shared. Elena took a deep breath, connected to the unity consciousness that was now her foundation, and began. 3 months ago, I thought I knew what consciousness was. I'm a neuroscientist. I've spent 20 years studying the brain, publishing papers, teaching students that consciousness is somehow generated by neural activity. And then I had an experience that showed me everything I'd been taught was backwards. She paused, letting that land. I'm not going to tell you what to believe. I'm going to teach you practices that will let you experience directly what I'm describing. Because the truth about consciousness isn't something you believe, it's something you experience. And when you experience it, you'll understand why humanity is at a crossroads and what choice we're being offered. For the next 2 hours, Elena taught. She explained the mechanism of consciousness, making it accessible without dumbing it down. She demonstrated energy healing, inviting volunteers to experience direct healing through intention. She guided the entire group through a meditation into unity consciousness, and she watched as faces around the room shifted from skepticism to wonder to recognition. This is what you actually are, she said as people came out of the meditation. Many crying, many laughing, many sitting in stunned silence. Not the limited, separate, struggling person you've been taught to believe you are. You are consciousness itself, eternal and infinite, temporarily experiencing existence from a human perspective. And when enough of us remember this, everything changes. After the workshop, people surrounded her. Questions, gratitude, stories of awakening. And Elena realized that Zephyros had been right. She wasn't meant to save humanity alone. She was meant to ignite a fire that would spread through natural contagion. One woman approached, probably in her 60s, tears streaming down her face. I've been waking at 3 a.m. for 6 years, always feeling like I was missing something. And today, for the first time, I understand what I've been trying to remember. Thank you. Thank you for helping me come home. Elena hugged her, recognizing a fellow traveler on the path back to remembering. "You don't need to thank me," Elena said. "This is what we do for each other. We wake each other up. And then together, we help humanity reach critical mass before the window closes." Over the following months, Elena trained hundreds of people in consciousness technologies. Some became teachers themselves, spreading the practices to their own communities. Others applied the techniques in their professions, doctors integrating energy healing with conventional medicine, therapists using unity consciousness practices to treat trauma, teachers bringing these methods into classrooms. The movement grew exponentially, not through marketing or organization, but through organic sharing. Every person who experienced unity consciousness became a transmission point, helping others access the same state. And Elena continued to receive guidance. Not from Zephyros directly. He'd warned her that his physical form would only last those 86 hours. But from the consciousness field itself, from her own higher awareness now that she'd learned to access it reliably. She understood now that the 3 a.m. awakening hadn't been pathology. It had been her soul's desperate attempt to break through conditioning before it was too late. And now that she'd answered the call, now that she was fulfilling her purpose, sleep came easily and peacefully. 6 years remain. The window is still open. Humanity continues to approach critical mass, person by person, community by community, awakening spreading like fire through dry grass. You who are reading this story are not reading by accident. Your consciousness brought you here because you too have been feeling that cosmic homesickness, that sense that something essential is missing, that urgency that wakes you in the night. This is your confirmation. What you've been feeling is real. You are being called to remember what you truly are. And when you answer that call, when you allow yourself to experience unity consciousness even briefly, you become part of the solution, part of the critical mass that determines whether humanity graduates or repeats this difficult lesson for another 26,000 years. The practices Elena learned can be taught. The experience of unity consciousness can be facilitated. You don't need to meet an alien. You just need to be willing to question everything you've been taught about consciousness and reality and try practices that let you experience the truth directly. You have capacities you don't know you possess. Healing through intention. Telepathic sensitivity. Energy perception. Manifestation through consciousness. Your DNA carries dormant codes for all of it, waiting to be activated by the simple act of remembering what you actually are. The suppression system is real, but it's losing power as more people awaken. The hidden elite who've controlled humanity for 12,000 years can't stop a consciousness revolution because consciousness cannot be controlled, only temporarily forgotten. And you're remembering now. That's why you read this far. That's why something in you recognizes the truth in these words even if your rational mind resists. 6 years remain. Will you be one of the 80 million who consciously choose to embody unity consciousness? Will you let yourself remember what humanity has forgotten? The window is closing. But it's not closed yet. And you are exactly where you need to be, exactly when you need to be here, to play your role in the greatest transformation humanity has ever experienced. Welcome home. Subscribe to the channel. Activate notifications. Share this with others who are ready to remember. The awakening continues. And you are part of it.